Good question. Let me take a look. Nope, it's still live. Let me change the thing to drops. All right, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. I'm currently just getting a couple of things squared away on my end before the stream begins in earnest. But for those of you who are tuned in, hopefully y'all are ready to learn about etheric biology, the science of how Aether affects the body and how the body affects Aether. Because that is going to be today's subject. Also, thank you, Naya and Nanao, for the gifted subs, respectively. Enjoy your unicorns. Oh, that's a hype train level 2. Okay. Oh, yeah. For those of you who are not aware, there is currently a campaign, a support a streamer campaign going on with Final Fantasy XIV as well. If you purchase 3 subscriptions, gifted or whatever, to Final Fantasy XIV streamers, uh, you do unlock the Rainbow Unicorn mount. So if you've ever wanted to ride a Galarian Rapidash through Eorzea, there you go. Really should have figured out some loading screen music before I went live on the loading screen. Something to figure out for next time. How's my audio, by the way? Are y'all able to hear me clearly? Good, good, good. For some reason, the streaming software doesn't want to pick up the in-game audio, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. Is oh geez, uh, thank you for the gifted subs, Mirren. For those of you wondering, any subs that you gift to me here are going to, or the money from those subs is going towards my bills so that I can continue to live. Yay! Oh, you know what? I know what the problem is. Give me just a second. we go. Okay, here we go. We're getting started now. Sorry for the delays. There we go. Also, Mirren, can you throw up an ad for me for the class for Party Finder while I'm going through the class? Please and thank you. That way Naya can focus on actually handling the questions and stuff. Oh, yeah. Oh god, no. Why did that grab everything? Stop that. Oh, that's why. There we go. That'll do. Okay. How's that? Any better? It's really easy for me to accidentally blow out people's eardrums, so I tend to be a little bit conservative with it. Such is the burden of having a deep voice. Right. First off, thank you all for coming to the lesson. For those of you who are new to who I am and what I do, I am Lunaire Blackwind, headmaster for the Ocean's Refuge Adventure Academy, and I'll be the one conducting today's lesson. Oh, what the hell? When did we get to Hype Train level 5? That's wild. Thank you for the gifteds, Edwin. Not going to read that one because you're already here. Last public lesson I conducted, I covered the basics of aetherology, from the 6 nativities all the way up to properties and more. for those of you who are watching the stream right now, if you want to see that lesson, the VOD is available, although I think it's not on Twitch anymore. You would have to go to my YouTube channel to find it, but it is there, at least. Fortunately, the VODs for these classes are kept separate from the rest of whatever I did during that stream, so you won't have to trudge through a bunch of, like, Star Citizen or anything. It is just the Final Fantasy XIV class VOD. Similarly, the VOD for this lesson will also be saved and sent to YouTube. It will probably be a week or two before it gets posted, but it will go. Unfortunately, Crazy, you will be getting homework. No. No, but if you're interested at all in the lore of Final Fantasy XIV, this is a good place to be. Today we'll be discussing something a bit more near to our hearts. Literally, we'll be discussing etheric biology, the study of how Aether influences and is influenced by the physical body and mind of living and non-living creatures. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with how the bestiary in Final Fantasy XIV works, it does count things like robots, golems, and so forth as being quote-unquote living things. So they do fall into this category of study. That particularly... They are particularly lumped into categories such as Forgekin for robots and other machinery, Soulkin for things like golems or other unliving creatures. Elementals, which do not have a physical body per se, but are considered otherwise alive due to possessing something resembling sapience. Sometimes. Looking at you, sprites. Edwin shilling for Oras in the chat. Love it. Now, to start us off, let's discuss something simple. How many of you would say there's Aether in you right now? Not just the Aether making up your physical form, but raw, flowing Aether. Give me a show of hands. I see a couple of hands up. Chaos and Rit. Linear making you all sit in the rain while he stands underneath the tarps. You all look uncomfortable, I wonder why. Pneumonia hours, who's up? The short answer is that every last one of you has Aether circulating through your body. And this is a normal part of life across the star. The circulation of Aether in the body is, like the circulation of Aether through the environment, a vital part of the life processes throughout the realm. If you don't have Aether circulating through an area, it grows dull and dead, withering and dying away until the land itself becomes barren. Doubly so if the flow of Aether draws out what Aether remains unnaturally. This particular phenomenon is one that we can see in places such as the burn, though it can also be witnessed on smaller scales. And this is actually a really important detail regarding the burn. Like, people wonder, why does the burn look like that? Well, they don't wonder why. They know it's because of the lack of flow of Aether. But we see other places that are low on Aether without being so pale and lifeless. And ultimately, it's the best way I like to think of it is that it's like drawing out the color. If you ever think about cases where they remove like the chlorophyll from a leaf, you know, the leaf gets very pale. The leaf eventually becomes borderline transparent. It's a similar process with what has happened with the burn. Except in place of chlorophyll with the burn, it's Aether. Earth Aether is the most abundant thing there, which is why you still see a lot of browns and things like that. But everything else in the burn has been reduced down to dust because the Aether in the burn has been pulled away by the Aether currents not being able to pull in new Aether while still pulling out the present Aether there for the not the Assassins, the Allagan's machinery for Az's Law. If the flow of Aether were simply stymied, it likely wouldn't have gone quite so desolate and barren. Aether would still circulate through the burn. It would just not be nearly as lush and abundant as like Eorzea has become. You'd probably be looking at it as being more of a desert, kind of like, well, maybe not a desert, but think of Garlemald. Garlemald is a very barren and cold place, and that can be chalked up to a low circulation of Aether through the area. Because it doesn't have a whole lot of Aether coming in and promoting the circulation and growth of life, you end up with this cold and hostile environment. And just the same as with the Aether flowing through the lands, Aether needs flow through the body as well to help promote and maintain life. For those who cannot, a condition I believe is called Aether spurn. It can be hard or even nigh impossible to survive for long due to this deficiency in Aether. We actually see this in both the Sage quest line, where it is a major plot point, as well as to a lesser extent, and it's not Aether Spurn in that case, but it is still a limitation on the flow of Aether through a body, and we'll be discussing more of that particular case later. We see it in the final quest of the Thaumaturge quest line. Now, can anyone tell me how the body circulates this Aether? And if you know in chat and you're not here in character, feel free to answer in the Twitch chat. No, 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 Edwin. Not 102. 10 inches, 2 centimeters, they're a Lalafell. average Lalafell height. Ambrosia says, Aether Spurn sounds dreadful. Ritskilt says, it goes just flowing to and from. Is there a little well inside you? Marina says, by eating and breathing? And Ambrosia suggests by living. I'm not sure. Probably eventually. I'd probably end up wanting to get like custom ones eventually, but I can't afford to commission that, so. Oh wait, Chaos got it. Oh, right. Yeah, the PNG tuber thing doesn't show up if I'm not in a Discord call, so let me... There, happy now? Now you can see it? Zuzuse guesses we can circulate Aether going towards low to high density parts of the body, yes? A good guess, Zuzuse, and correct if you were to be discussing the flow of Aether through the environment, but not quite accurate in this case. Chaos, however, seems to have been paying attention in past lessons. Aether is circulated through a network made up of what are known as Aether channels. These are a series of paths through which the body is able to circulate that Aether without the Aether being expelled uncontrollably. So, this is actually the thing that I was referencing earlier when I said that we'd be talking more about the level 30 quest line, the level 30 quest for the Thaumaturge quest line. Spoilers, I'm going to be discussing the end of that quest line. It is a level 30 quest line from ARR. If you are upset by me talking about it in public like this, sucks to be you. It's been so many years. I can get through that quest line in like 15 minutes. So, in that quest line, we actually got our first and probably the most important tidbit about how Aether is circulated through the body. And it is that there are what are referred to as Aether channels inside the body. And we know about these because during the culmination of that quest line, one of the Coco brothers, who has been possessed by a void scent the entire time, who fed on his desire to be able to cast magics like his brothers, his older brother offers himself up to the void scent for the void scent to free the brother that it had been possessing. And during its possession of the older Coco brother, it drains his Aether to the point that his Aether channels are withered. They shrivel and become unable to circulate Aether properly. From the context of the conversation, it sounds a lot like the damage to the Aether channels, and this is further supported by the things we learn about Aether Spurn and in general what we learn about the natural propensity of an individual to be able to cast and use magic is that changing the size of your Aether channels, making yourself able to channel more Aether at one time, isn't really something that you can do freely. The Coco brother that got possessed initially, the one that was insecure about his ability to cast magic, was actually an alchemist who worked towards being able to make an elixir that would let him expand his etheric capacity. But from the context, it very much sounded like the sort of thing where he'd never be able to recreate the product, probably due to rare materials or it just being an accident. It's hard to say because it's treated with a finality when he ultimately decides to use that potion to fix his older brother's Aether channels so that his older brother's body is able to circulate Aether properly, regaining both his ability to cast magic but also his vitality to keep from dying. Okay, so uh, Rit said, "So we've got little tubes going through our arms. What Aether goes flowing through?" Ambrosia says, that would explain why Uncle was worried about it when I was younger. Zeus says, well, at least I wasn't entirely wrong in terms of ethereal workings. Good job, however, they say to Chaos, and Chaos says,
Not literal tubes, more etherical. Think of it like oxygen flow or blood flow, except Aether.
that's right, Cody. Chaos gets the voice. As Chaos says, Aether channels are more akin to veins, or perhaps it would be more appropriate to reference nerves than anything. In fact, the networks largely overlap, circulating in much the same way, except rather than drawing air from the lungs, the Aether channels draw Aether from the stomach and lungs to circulate it through the body. Marina says, so Garleans would have deficient channels then? Due to the nature of Aether, the Aether channels aren't hollow. Rather, they're made up of particularly conductive and insulative tissues, which allow for the proper circulation of Aether without it just distributing directly into the surrounding organs straight away. And yes, the Garlean inability to manipulate external Aether well is indeed chalked up to their Aether channels being smaller than the norm. So, and Naya's hydrating me. Why are you like this? Why are they Mickey Mouse? Because it's funny. So, on the topic of Garleans, I will say that the inability to manipulate Aether well is a little bit of headcanon / inference. It is canonical that Garleans have difficulty manipulating Aether typically. There are a couple of rare exceptions, but they are not the norm among Garleans. However, it is confirmed by word of God that the reason that Garleans are unable to manipulate Aether is genetic in origin. So, it stands to reason that the most likely cause is that the Aether channels in Garleans are just not as strong as they are in everybody else, and it's just transmitted genetically through pure-blooded Garleans. When you get into hybrid, like Garlean other species hybrids as well, you get to see that it's actually very much the case that most of the part Garlean characters we know of in the setting are able to manipulate Aether normally, which means that not only is it a genetic trait, it is likely a recessive genetic trait that only shows up in the Garleans because it is something that the purebloods have going on, and they largely are prejudiced against breeding with non-Garleans. Sounds like a lot of Sawbones talk, Rit says. And Zazuse says Sawbones in confusion. of course, there's some level of nuance to all of this, and an individual's ability to manipulate Aether will vary even from individual to individual among those races, more typically blessed with the capacity than the Garleans. There's cases of individuals from all the spoken races who lack a talent in manipulating Aether, and many times it's due to this hereditary predisposition to have smaller or weaker Aether channels. This actually comes back to the case with the Coco brothers, where Coco Busi is unable to manipulate Aether very well. It's stated that he doesn't have the capacity to circulate enough Aether, to manipulate enough Aether, to do the magic that his brothers can do, and it drives a lot of the plot of that plot line. And that's not unique to him. Like, he's not a fringe case. It's very much just the case of the matter that the ability to manipulate Aether is entirely just a genetic trait. And so there's variance. There's weaker, there's stronger. Depending on what you're dealing with, you may be able to cast Meteor without needing any help. I mean, that's an extreme case, but in other cases, you may not even be able to use basic healing. And there's really not anything that can be done about this. This is also why Garleans, in a bid to bridge the gap, so to speak, turn to more esoteric means of expanding their etheric capacity by entreating with Void Scent, giving rise to the Reaper Arts. In lieu of a way to enhance their own etheric capacity, they needed to turn to a proxy. So, yes and no, Volitor. We do know from the case with Coco Busi that it is possible to expand the Aether channels. Ah, okay. We do know it's possible to expand the Aether channels because Coco Busi was able to make that elixir. But the means to do it, there's really only a couple of ways that it would work safely. The first is alchemic means, which is what Coco Busi resorted to, and you'd essentially need a way to both reinforce the tissues that make up the Aether channels, and you'd need to also supplement the flow of Aether itself from the stomach and the lungs, and maintain that long enough that it becomes normal. The other method would be essentially just working it like a muscle. You'd have to continually be casting as much magic as you can, as often as you're able, and letting it rest as well so that you don't overdo it and damage them. And just keep that up in a long-term process to gradually expand your capacity. And if you overdo it, if you go too hard or try and do it too fast, you're almost certainly going to damage those channels. You're going to end up compromising them, and it's a mess. The Echo stuff is actually a different case. Hello! Welcome to the stream. So, the Echo stuff with Stormblood wouldn't have been dealing with the Aether channels. That was actually directly dealing with the Aether of the Soul, which that's not the same as the Aether that is circulated through the body. When we talk about the Aether in the Aether channels, and we're talking about the Aether, the Aether that when we're talking about the Aether that's in the Aether channels, it's still considered a part of corporeal Aether rather than being part of the incorporeal Aethers, even though it is fluid and flowing rather than being a fixed part of the body the way that the rest of the corporeal Aether is. Now, we've discussed the means by which Aether circulates through the body, but we should also take the time to discuss the nature of what happens when it doesn't. What do you suppose happens to a body when it lacks Aether to circulate? Soft Pause says, it dies? Rit says, suppose it just kind of shrivels up, like a raisin in the sun. Ambrosia says, or like my dumpling of a carbuncle dissipates. You're both right. Writ more than the lasses. The body withers away, vitality lost, the body having to absorb its own aether to sustain itself as long as possible. Eventually, the stored aether becomes insufficient and fails, leading to death. Chaos says, lacks of aether flowing. Doesn't it try to get back to a certain amount of aether from your surroundings, like it sort of restores itself naturally? Eventually, the stored aether becomes insufficient and fails, leading to death. The ability to absorb ambient aether can help, but there's only so much aether that can be drawn from the environment before you equalize with it. It's a passive behavior, not an active process. Zazuse says, "Indeed, and in the end, when all is said and done, it can make funerary rites interesting." Indeed, the absorption of ambient aether into a body is often a cause for Ashkin to rise as well. We actually see this in action most prominently in places like Pharaoh Sirius, where the mega flare that Bahamut unleashed when Dalamud fell during the Calamity. One of the bolts from the mega flare hit Pharaoh Sirius, that lighthouse off the coast of Aleport in western Lenosha, and it caught a bunch of people inside in the impact and killed them. Ever since then, the crystal that had formed because of this impact, this land scar from the mega flare bolt, and I actually talked about this a fair bit in the first class I did on stream. The aether from that crystal causes a whole slew of weird shit to occur, and that includes the revival of corpses in Pharaoh Sirius, turning them into hostile enemies that attack you. But we'll get to more about that in a little bit. On that topic, we should briefly discuss the nature of the aether within the body. I'm sure that at least some of you are aware that the aether that we're made up of is typically split into three categories. One is corporeal aether, and two are incorporeal. Which of these do you suppose the aether that circulates through us is, and why? Soft pause guesses both. Blood is the corporeal, so that's a little more literal, though I would imagine incorporeal aether is carried along with it. Chaos says, both? Corporeal is more in our systems, incorporeal is more like a more spiritual connection with our aether. It's confusing what I read about incorporeal aether. Brit says, incorporeal? That means it ain't something you can touch, right? And I was able to go make a little orb of water, and I'm in my and shut up. I'm trying to read Brit's accent. Cut me some slack here. Chaos says,
Incorporeal is like the soul of something. Think like those soul crystals. They have aether, obviously, but it is more of the memories and teachings of someone than like their actual aether.
reasonable assumptions, but no. Ultimately, the Aether which circulates through the Aether channels is almost exclusively considered corporeal Aether. While it's not solid in the way the benches under you might be, it's still a tangible form of Aether, and isn't actually connected to the mind or soul at all, precluding it from being either of those. As a bit of clarity, when I say that it's not connected, obviously the mind and soul can control and influence it, but it's not drawing from either of those for it. It's absorbed, circulated, used, and never really stays for extended periods of time the way that the incorporeal forms are, and the incorporeal forms of Aether are particularly noted for being difficult, bordering on nigh impossible, to safely manipulate. You're right, you're right. I won't do the voice anymore if people don't redeem for it. People redeemed for it. I assume. Oh, geez. Okay. How about this? For the stream only, I will exclusively do those for those two voice redeems. I'll exclusively do it for chaos for the rest of the stream. And there's the hydrate. Of course, when I say that they're unrelated, that's not quite accurate, since it's with one's mind that they manipulate their Aether for the casting of magics. But it's not drawing from the Aether of the mind so much as being pushed by it. So the point stands. Did soft pause just cease to exist over there? What the fuck happened? I just saw them blink out of existence. Did they Pokeball and I missed it? Oh. Now, with that in mind, we should really discuss the flip side of the matter, the absorption of Aether into the body. Tell me, have any of you ever heard of or tried Archon Loaf? If you haven't, I can have Eos pass you a piece. Was that ever in doubt, now? Oh! Triple kill. Rit takes a big bite. Zazuse began to take a bite, then probably stood up and threw it as far as they could before sitting wordlessly back down. To the odd realm with you. But hold on, wait a minute. You bought so many gifted subs earlier and didn't get one for yourself. You brought that on yourself. Soft pause says, "Hey, don't waste food, Zazuse." Zazuse says, "I shall waste this wretched, disgustingly vile concoction." Carrie says, "God, what is this made of? Soap?" To which Naya responds with fish paste and crushed dreams. Ritz, as he chewed, his expression would shift through an entire stage play of emotions in likewise manner to a man who's just been told his wife was with child. Swallowing it down, he'd look at the piece of bread with perplexity. "Tastes like fish." While it's certainly an acquired flavor, Archon loaf can't be disregarded in regards to its usefulness in restoring the aether of someone when consumed. It's dense with aether, perfectly balanced, and just as packed with nutrition, able to sustain one on just Archon loaf alone for extended periods, whether you like it or not. Now, I would normally ask at this point if anyone could tell me what, aside from the consumption of food, one could do to replenish their corporeal aether. However, the answer was already given earlier by Marina discussing eating and breathing, and by Chaos discussing the passive absorption of aether, so we'll skip to the next bit. When it comes to the absorption of Aether, there's three means: eating and drinking, breathing, and simple passive absorption from the environment. But can anyone tell me if there's any problems with these methods? Upper crust should like exotic bread. Because crust, like bread. Someone slap them. And Chaos once again demonstrates that she is the biggest nerd in the audience by getting the answer.
Oversaturation! Your Aether channels can't fit all of that Aether.
Well, yes, time is a factor, but can be overcome with things such as ether and other alchemical concoctions, or through recipes such as that of Archon Loaf. Chaos, however, once again demonstrates she's been paying attention in class. I'm alluding to oversaturation. There's the hydrate, Naya. Rit says, "Oh, is that why we's gotta go to the bathroom instead of just whooshing it all out all magic-like?" Naya stares at Rit for a moment, blinking slowly. She has no words. So Zirce, Rit, why would your first thoughts be that of waste? Kiri is struck silent, and Rit responds with, "Well, it's gotta go somewheres." When it comes to the Aether which flows through the body, one needs to keep in mind that the body can only hold so much Aether before it reaches its limit. This is what we refer to as the saturation level of the body. And normally, in a normal, passive state, the body at rest maintains a certain level of saturation, with the aspects largely balanced across the six. Hello, Cody! However, under certain circumstances, this balance can be thrown askew or the saturation level can climb to the point that it becomes a problem, the opposite of what we discussed earlier with etheric deficiency. This problem is most often exhibited in two cases. The first and most common is in cases where the ambient aether of the environment is oversaturated itself, and an individual spends a prolonged amount of time in such places. Can anyone name some examples of places? If you're in the chat and not here in person, feel free to take some guesses in the Twitch chat as well. Carrie suggests. Big crystal place in Fanland. Give bad vibes. Not know why. Lots of corrupted aether there, I told. Lots of corrupted aether there, I told. Yeah, if you're in the back row, I can't hear you. So if you want to speak in game and offer answers, you'll probably need to be up in the upper two. Gotcha. Okay. Rit says, Oh, I know. Voidsent I is right. Corrupt today is. Kiri said that. Softpaw said, as impossible as it would be for us to face the void itself, from what I understand, it's ruined with darkness. Funny you mentioned Voidsent, Rit. You're not wrong about them being corrupted, but we'll get to them. Bunny says, in the mere presence of icons. Another good example, the presence of a primal can lead to oversaturation. It's not the same as tempering, which is often also a risk, but they're ultimately separate concerns. Still, a valid answer. In the end, Kiri's answer is one of the most common cases. The Burning Wall in eastern Thanland, Pharaoh Sirius in western Lenosha, Dismail Darkhold or Aurum Vale, or even the entirety of Mordona, all would be acceptable guesses, as is the proximity of an active primal. All of these places are oversaturated with Aether, and this can lead to the body absorbing a great deal of Aether from the environment, far more than would normally be the case through passive ambient absorption. This leads to a condition that many of you are likely familiar with. Would anyone care to guess what it is? And yeah, if you're here in game and you're enjoying this class or the stream or any of that, be sure to poke Naya for a link to the card or to. Which one did she pin? Did she pin the. Yeah, she pinned the Oras card here on the stream. And if you're enjoying the stream and want to see more of what I do on stream, I do have a streaming Discord separate from the Oras stuff that you can find a link to in my contacts here on Twitch. Soft Paws guesses Ethereal Corruption. Bunny McMurray guesses Aether Sickness. Zuzuse says Aether Sickness. That's right. An overabundance of Aether in one's body to the point of nearing oversaturation results in the body exhibiting a variety of symptoms, which are collectively referred to as Aether sickness. Not really a malady in itself, the way a cold or flu might be, Aether sickness is still the body's way of responding to an oversaturation of Aether, and is meant to help encourage one to get away from whatever's causing the oversaturation. Pigeon is hydrating me now. So, this is actually something that we largely learn during the Pharaoh Sirius and Pharaoh Sirius hard quest lines. And it comes up over and over in other cases as well. For example, we know there's some lore relating to it in regards to Dismail Darkhold, which is another area that I mentioned earlier as being saturated with Aether, except in that case it's largely polarized rather than oversaturated towards any one aspect. But essentially, the body absorbs enough Aether to a point and then starts to display these symptoms of nausea, dizziness, and other flu like symptoms. And it's all to try and get you to get the fuck out. This is actually also the reason that the I'm trying to remember. I think it's like the first cutscene, like in the game, or no? Yes. It is the first cutscene in the game when you are riding in on the wagon to your starting town. You During the conversation with the guy on the wagon, he will reference that a lot of people who are new to Eorzea become nauseous because the region is so rife with Aether to the point of being more abundant with Aether than anywhere else on the star. And so it's very common for people who are new to Eorzea to get Aether sick because of it. And we know from the Pharaoh Sirius case that all you really have to do to deal with Aether sickness is just get out of where you're being saturated. Left to its own devices, Aether will typically trend towards equilibrium. It tries to flow from an area of high density to low density. Basically the same process that osmosis works on. Oh, thank you for the gifteds, Selkar01. So would that mean we came from somewhere else, or is this something breaking the fourth wall type of shenanigans? What do you mean? Get that unicorn. Yeah, exactly. Osmosis Jones to Ethereal Transfer Jones. I don't think that's going to roll off the tongue quite as nice. Thanks for finally following me, Mirren. Stairs. That we got Aether sick from picking our first town. Does this mean we hailed from somewhere else in the beginning, or again, fourth wall breaking? Thank you for the follow, Valder. Brock. So it's as I recall, the dialogue doesn't say that we are getting Aether sick so much as the guy guesses that we might be feeling Aether sick, and that's why we spaced out. Because the conversation happens right after we have our first vision of the Mother Crystal. We go through that beginning scene, that beginning vision of the Aether Crystal, and then wake up in the wagon. And that's when he asks, you okay? You spaced out? Are you nauseous? Lots of folks get nauseous when they come to Eorzea for the first time. So it's less that we got nauseous necessarily, as it is that he guesses we could have been nauseous, and it's left up to the player's imagination whether or not their character is. Lunaire has seasoned Lalafell before and fed them to a slime. Listen, you season a couple Lalafell and they never let you live it down. Jesus. Also, Lalafell can have a seasoning. Be very, very concerned and careful if they offer it to you and they are Dune folk. Never accept a Dune folk's seasoning if offered. You will regret it. Soft Pause says, "Isn't that why the burn is so dangerous?" Talking about the aether flowing to and from the body thing. One of many reasons, yes. Bunny says, "There's a method o' active spell work to pump corporeal aether from the body in emergency situations. It involves a porksy. And yes, you could utilize energy drain or similar to the same effect if you're using Arcanum." And then Chaos says,
Basically, if you're feeling sick around an area with bad aether in the air, you should probably leave.
"What?" Listen, don't blame me. Blame the people who redeemed for the voice specifically to use on you. Huh. So it's just get the hells out of there, eh? More or less. Of course, this only works to a certain point. Unfortunately, aether sickness is a symptom of the body becoming more and more saturated, but it isn't the end of the progression. Okay, hold on. No, hold on. I didn't. First off, I still disagree that I seasoned you. It was just a squirt of lemon juice. If anything, you were basted. No, no. Statute of limitations has passed on that, Cody. Sorry, kneecaps. Again, statute of limitations. Lunar, get behind me. I'll defend your shins and knees. I mean, all I really need to do is stand on the counter. They won't be able to reach me. What? As the body gets closer and closer to a point we refer to as the point of oversaturation, the symptoms of aether sickness will continue to grow more and more severe. In the case that the individual in question doesn't get away from the thing causing the oversaturation, however, it can result in more extreme conditions. Specifically, I'm referring to corporeal corruption. Shit. How dare you turn on me like this, Brock? I'm glad AI has knowledge on the right terminology for Lullafell consumption. Finally, it's doing something actually intelligent. Lunaire, I want a divorce. There you go, Naya. Yeah, as a heads up, at Naya's suggestion, I have recently turned most of the Lunaire stickers that I have into emotes here on the channel. So if you like them and want to use them in Twitch chat elsewhere, subscribe, follow, subscribe. You know, a couple are available just for followers. The rest are available for subscribers. When the body reaches a point of oversaturation, the aether filling the body begins to disrupt and displace the structure of the body, causing unpredictable and irreversible changes to the individual in question. This process, known as corporeal corruption, is often extremely fast. A cascading failure as the corrupting tissues in turn oversaturate the adjacent ones, spreading out of control until the entire body has corrupted. And unless it's stopped the instant it starts, it almost always ends before anything can be done. And once it has, there's no undoing it. All you can hope to do is grant the victim a painless mercy. Zuzurse says, "How horrific. To suffer death so painful and all aware it could not be avoided. At least it's swift." Rit says, "No going back, eh?" Bunny says, "Not that I've heard of." Of course, even if you stop the corruption before it completely engulfs them, the corrupted tissues are still corrupted. Even in the rare cases that the corruption is halted, the only real treatment for such cases is the complete removal of the corrupted tissues, while ensuring that the oversaturation is rectified. So, this is something that we actually see in in the process of happening. I'm going to warn you guys now. This is spoilers for Shadowbringer. If you haven't already done it, you really, really should. But it's been so long that I'm not going to stop here just in case somebody hasn't. So I'll give you a minute to mute me if you need. I'll jump on stream when I get done with the spoilery bit. Okay, that's probably long enough for folks to mute. And if it's not, I'll always think it should have been. So we actually see a case of corporeal corruption due to oversaturation occur with the Crystal Exarch post Shadowbringers. It's actually going on the entire time that Shadowbringers is during that entire expansion, we can see the corporeal corruption in the process. I'm off. Have a good rest of the stream, dude. That's the hope. Later. But the Crystal Exarch is the entire time that we are in the first. The Crystal Exarch is undergoing corporeal corruption due to the power of the Crystal Tower running through their body the entire time. An entire Allegan superstructure funneling all of this aether through one person. And that's why the Crystal Exarch is crystallizing. That's what's happening. That's the corporeal corruption. There's so much aether running through his body that he is physically corrupting and turning into crystal the same way that the shots that hit the Burning Wall, Pharaoh Sirius, etc., all of those land scars, it's the same process. There's so much aether there that the physical structure of the more mundane materials that were there are being replaced and converted into crystal which is in turn converting the other tissues around it into crystal as well. And it's a completely irreversible process that the only reason it takes the Exarch so long to finally turn into complete crystal is because, by his own words, he's slowing it down using Allegan technology as long as he can, and even the Allegans can't turn it back. So this is a case of unaspected corporeal corruption, though. We actually see several other cases of corporeal corruption with the Black Mage quest line, of all things. The whole reason that the Black Mages require their Jobstone is to prevent over aspectation, which is like oversaturation, except it's for one aspect in particular, overpowering all of the rest and throwing off the balance. In that case, though, in the case of over aspectation, rather than complete crystallization, you get corporeal corruption that results in them becoming a manifestation of the properties of the aspects that they are over aspected with. For the Black Mage quest line, in this case, we are talking about spontaneous combustion, largely, or freezing through. And it's because they're trying to use the fire spells and the ice spells that Black Mage is known for without having the Black Mage Jobstone to act as a limiter to keep them from over aspecting in that way. And there's actually a couple of... Oh, thank you for the gifted sub, Rishdia. In case you're trying to go for the unicorn mount, you do have to gift a total of 3 to 14 streamers. Just so that you're not, like, confused if you didn't get it. You're probably spreading them out across other people, though. But if memory serves, I think there was a elemental as well. No, there's not. I thought the Gras were. They're from Pharaoh Sirius, but they're not a case of corporeal corruption like I thought they might be. But we actually also see an interesting case where the corporeal corruption can be kind of guided in a weird way, and it's a mix of over aspectation, corporeal corruption disrupting the physical structure, and tempering, influencing the sense of self that an individual has, and twisting it into something inhuman. And that's in the Drowned in Sestasha Hard. They undergo the corporeal corruption due to oversaturation from Leviathan's breath, but because Leviathan is also tempering them, he's overriding their mental sense of self with his own. The corporeal corruption causes their physical form to become disrupted. It changes and takes on a form more resembling what they picture in their own mind following the tempering. And that's why you end up with these thematically appropriate fishmen as the Drowned. And you see something similar with the Telophoroi, who are converted in Tower of Babel. I'm trying to think if there are other examples of corporeal corruption in that vein. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure there are. But it's it's weirdly not heavily used. So, there are actually. Oh. Of course, this speaks only of corporeal corruption born of aetheric oversaturation. There are actually three varieties of the condition, largely identical in cause, setting aside their specific details, and all result in corporeal corruption, albeit in different flavors. The first is the one we just spoke of, oversaturation. This tends to result in destabilization and ultimately crystallization of the flesh. This is something you can go see for yourselves in the Burning Wall, or more clearly in Mordona. There's some trees near the Sun's camp that I recommend checking out if you wish, in particular, that let you see and compare a uncorrupted specimen and a corrupted one in the same place.
Wait, I know the other two types of corruptions.
Chaos claims. Well, while Chaos elaborates on that, give me just a moment here. I think I've got pictures of the trees in question. Yeah. So, I've actually got a picture here, a screenshot of the trees that I'm talking about, and you'll see what I mean about the corporeal corruption disrupting the normal structure of the thing in question. So, let me... Uh, ba, ba, ba. So I'm gonna quickly show this to you. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the corporeal corruption. You'll be able to see on the left there are these two trees here, which are the same type of tree as this or that, but they have begun to undergo the corporeal corruption. They're turning into crystal actively, and you can see on the tree where the bark and the wood is actively becoming crystal. This tree hasn't gone under that process yet, but the one on the right hasn't gone under that process yet, but it's going to eventually. Especially with the way that Mordona is constantly oversaturated, undergoing gloom and things like that. Uh, okay, I see what you're talking about, Bunny. That might count as corporeal corruption. I'm not sure though, because it's hard to say. Uh, it's hard to say how much the glow is a result of corporeal corruption versus just the tree being fucking weird. Chaos tries to ponder in her mind, scrambling to get out a notebook with some notes, scribble in an unorganized mess that only she can process.
We talked about oversaturation, but we also have overaspectation and overpolarization. Of course, aspectation dealing with the six aspects, and polarization dealing with the umbral and astral. I think you mentioned overpolarization not being as fatal due to how quick it returns to the middle. I could be wrong. It has been a while since we had those lessons.
Yes, actually. That's correct, actually. Oversaturation is the first, but overaspectation and overpolarization are the other two varieties of corporeal corruption that can occur. Chaos is truly a nerd of Arcanima now. She can't tell if she should be proud of that or be worried people will stuff her in lockers at the Academy. If they had any lockers to be stuffed in, Lunaire will order you some lockers. Don't worry, Chaos. You'll get the full experience. The former is most often the case in places where the etheric balance of the aspects is so skewed that it's dangerous. Kurthus, for example, being this towards ice, though it will likely balance out eventually, while overpolarization would be the result of polarity hitting an extreme. As you noted, however, overpolarization is, practically speaking, a non-concern. Due to polarity being a result of the energy of Aether, it fluctuates far more quickly and fluidly than the other two. And unless the environment itself is fully polarized, you'll likely never actually see anyone reach the point of overpolarization. So, this is really, really important. And I don't think that a lot of folks realize this. Overpolarization really only can occur in cases where the polarity of the environment is locked to one extreme or the other. If it isn't, the energy that, or the lack of energy that is causing that polarization gets balanced out by the natural flow of Aether to and from the body from the ambient environment. You have to have the ambient environment completely locked, or you'll never be able to maintain the extreme on polarity long enough to cause corporeal corruption. This is why we never see Void Scent or Sin Eaters in the source, and only ever see Sin Eaters in the first and Void Scent from the Void, from the 13th. They only occur there because those environments are fully polarized. And being in those environments for a prolonged period of time will naturally cause your own polarity to gradually attune towards one or the other. You can take steps to mitigate that to an extent, but you're still going to eventually end up polarizing completely if nothing is done to change it. Now, we see this in the first with the folks at the inn where you, well, I call it an inn, but that rock camp that you go to during the start of Endwalker, where you find Alice, or not Endwalker, Shadowbringers, where you find Alice, where they keep all of those people that are gradually turning into Sin Eaters, and it's because they are completely polarized. But it's taking a lot longer because you have to polarize the entire body to reach the point of corporeal corruption. In that case, the solution would normally be to get someplace where you aren't being polarized anymore, but you can't do that. The environment is completely polarized in the first. You can't get away from that polarity until the Warrior of Light turns up and brings darkness back to the world. The same is true of the 13th. You see it during the Crystal Tower raid series when Nero gets stuck in the fucking void and we have to fish his dumbass out. He is beginning to corrupt and turn purple there, the same way that the people in the first started to turn white from being polarized by the unending light. And if he hadn't gotten out of the void, he would have eventually turned into a Sin Eater, or not a Sin Eater, a Void Scent just like the rest. And in this vein, Sin Eaters and Void Scent are the same damn thing, just literally the polar opposite ends of the spectrum of polarity. Everything about them is essentially mirrored between them. The only real difference is stemming from the actual properties of the polarity itself. Now, over aspectation and over polarization aside, the one that most people would need worry about is oversaturation. But ultimately, the three conditions are all relatively uncommon, not unheard of, but unless inflicted deliberately or through extreme ignorance or neglect, they aren't something most people will need to worry about in the day to day. However, I'll give you all a chance to ask anything you wish about the topics we've discussed so far. I'll give it a minute for folks to ask anything that they wish. If you're watching the stream and not here in person, feel free to ask in stream as well. And we'll see what folks ask. If nothing happens in the next couple of minutes, we'll move on. Ooh, good question. Buddy McMurray asks, how does corruption affect some entities? A good question, and it depends on the nature of the summon. Take, for example, Eos here. This fairy is a manifestation of just my own Aether, and as such, has no corporeal form to speak of, only the temporary form that I've created for her. Because her form is already fluid and temporary, one of two things happen when an excess of Aether is poured into her. In one case, the overabundance of Aether may destabilize her structure, causing her to dissipate. In the other, however, she may incorporate it into her structure, using it to do something like this. Bunny asks, is there a particular inflection point between the two cases? For a more solid familiar, however, such as Soulkin, they may cause the familiar to corrupt and become uncontrollable or erratic. It may do nothing, and not really. It's a case-by-case basis, even among multiple familiars of the same sort, based on their internal structure. This is actually something that we see a little bit of in the North Shroud, I think it was, as well, where we see golems that would normally be fairly passive become erratic or aggressive because the Aether there is out of whack. And as I recall, there's a couple of other cases where similar familiars are exposed to excess amounts of Aether and undergo similar cases of becoming erratic and dangerous, causing some quests and dungeons and the like. We see it with Soulkin sometimes too. As say, slowly raised her hand, frowning nervously. It was finally starting to fully dawn on her that the way she's been using her own Aether could be considered dangerous. She wasn't sure if there was a question she could ask would answer this, and also still, she was nervous. Okay. So I am going to be winding down the class here after this question segment. Um, not really a whole lot else to cover on this particular topic right now. Not without getting into like a whole other multi-hour lecture, and that would be another class worth of talk in and of itself. So while we wait for Zizuse to respond, and for any other questions to trickle in that may, for those of you who have tuned in, thank you for watching. Just so you all know, I will be briefly ending the stream after the class, but I will be bringing the stream back up shortly after. I just want to break up the VOD as quick and easy as I can so that what I do after isn't in the same VOD as the class. After the class, I will be going over and doing some streaming of Star Citizen. I'm going to be doing a challenge run through a dangerous facility, and we'll see how that goes. Those runs always end up being a little randomized, just due to the nature of the run, and they're always a little bit different as a result. And of course, if you're wanting to get that rainbow unicorn, make sure that you have gifted 3 subs or bought 3 subs, either in my stream or another 14 streamer, wherever you decide to spend your money. Just know that if you get subs here in this channel, I will be putting that money towards my bills, so it's not going to like somebody's video game collection or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Zizuse says, apologies for the foolish question, yet if one were to find themselves drawn to certain elements in their spellcasting, say earth, wind, and flame, yet find themselves incapable of performing ice, leaven, and water, would this be over aspectation, or indeed, as Chaos brought up, something unrelated? And should I find myself intensely worried, or only a moderate amount? It would likely be something unrelated to over aspectation. I'd suggest making an appointment with medical following the lesson and actually listening to what they tell you instead of doing as your peers might and ignoring it in favor of your own fancy to the detriment of your own survival. Lunaire is now going to stare at Chaos for a long moment.
What?
You know what you did. Get called out. Right, thank you, Lunaire. Chaos. I will be sure to find medical attention post-haste, and after discussion with others, it would be wise to listen to their advice. She nods in agreement. Good, Zizuse, good. Listen, it's harder to do the voice when I've only got one word to work with. Like, it's a lot easier to go straight into the voice when I've got a longer sentence to say.
I'm just saying, could be incorporeal. I'm not an etherical reader.
Hums and Aether-sided medical staff. If there are no further questions, however, I'll be wrapping up the lesson here. Hopefully, you all have found this educational, and for those who may yet wish to ask a question, I'll remain here a brief while longer. Also, for those of you who have tuned into the stream, thank you for watching. If you haven't already checked out the link that Naya has pinned, I recommend it if you're not already part of Oras. If you are already part of Oras, thanks for tuning in and showing support for the class. I will be doing more of these public classes. I can't guarantee it'll be an every month thing, but it will probably be at least an every other month thing. They get a weirdly successful amount of turnout, in my opinion. Well, maybe it's not weirdly successful, but they get enough turnout by random people that it's well worth doing it just for the recruitment aspect alone for the community. And it's just generally nice on my end to be able to elaborate on some of the stuff that I teach in the classes and explain why I present certain things the way that I do, like with the oversaturation causing corporeal corruption thing. We know that corporeal corruption occurs it just isn't very clearly laid out what causes it or how it differs from cause to cause unless you start to look at the actual cases of it and compare them to the rest. Because, like, the case with the Crystal Exarch, the case with the Telophoroi, the case with the Drowned, they're all the same condition, but they all have somewhat different outcomes, and it largely comes down to how much they're oversaturated, whether there's tempering involved, and what the aspectation is. And then you have Sin Eaters and Void Sent, who are further cases of this corporeal corruption, and are yet another case of, well, this is slightly different here, but the underlying mechanics behind it are all the same. But for now, this is where the class portion of the stream will be ending. As I said briefly a minute ago, I will be ending the stream for a minute or two before I swap over and start stream back up. And after I start stream back up, I will be doing Star Citizen. So if you want to watch me suffer through a self-imposed challenge that is very likely to beat my ass, feel free to continue watching, and we will be right back with that. I'm just going to let the stream run for a little bit longer here, just in case someone comes up and asks some questions. And then once I am confident that I'm not going to have someone ask any questions that I want to catch on stream, I will go ahead and do that swap over. And for the folks from Oras that are watching, that are thinking of clicking away, I will judge you. No, I'm kidding. I don't mind. Star Citizen is not a game for everyone. Nah, I got nothing going on. I'd be here. Well, that's nice. I am just joking, though. I'm not gonna judge anyone for not wanting to watch me. I'm above your reproach. Be above this. Oh, wait. Fuck. Right, I'm not. Right, never mind. I'm streaming, so I turned all that off. Fuck. He really is beyond my reproach. Pardon me, for the, you said oversaturation, yes? That it is not curable. Do you know any wizards who say otherwise? I do not. The condition is permanent, irreversible once it has begun. Depending on severity, there may be means to deal with it surgically, however, or to stall the spread for a time, but there's no way to undo it once it has occurred. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, on the topic of corporeal corruption, we actually see a lot of other cases of things being corrupted in the way like the trees or the Exarch. The bear in Aether Font, for example, that second boss, I think? Yeah, it's the second boss that you run into in Aether Font. He's over aspected with Levin crystals, as I recall. He's able to shoot a bunch of lightning when he fights. That's because he's oversaturated from living in such an etherically. I mentioned the folks from Sastasha Hard, but they are a mix of tempering and over aspectation. So, calling someone a wizard in Final Fantasy XIV is so wrong. I mean, it's not, though. The bird on the mountain in Dawn Trail is another case of an animal that is over aspect. Once again with Levin, actually. Um, we see lots and lots of cases of that when you start to look for it, where something is being oversaturated and you can see the corporeal corruption starting to occur in their body. I'm gonna give it another, say, 8.5 minutes, and if nobody comes up at the 3-hour mark for stream, if nobody comes up before that to ask a question, I will go ahead and get swapped over to Star Citizen. And I'll be able to start the run, the challenge run, the Die Hard run. I'll be able to start that pretty much immediately. I get it. Today's lesson is actually why Oros is fairly particular about vetting people for the medical team before we let them join it. Because we know so much of this stuff about how the magic in the setting works, especially in regards to healing, that it's surprisingly easy for people to do things that, lore-wise, you cannot undo, like the corporeal corruption stuff. Now, there are some fringe cases, like with dragonification, that can temporarily be reversed, but that's very much a fringe case, and we understand why that can be reversed, because it's less a case of it's less a case of oversaturation and more a case of the dragon blood in question directly trying to temper the person and make them corporeally unstable to turn them into a dragon. And so it's a weird case. It's weird fringe cases like that. Fantasia is actually also likely to be a result of corporeal corruption. Well, not corporeal corruption exactly, but the same principle behind corporeal corruption. The corporeal destabilization mixed with we guess it's probably a slight hallucinogenic to loosen one's sense of self. Let them really convince themselves that they have become something other than what they were. And then the corporeal destabilization that the rest of the drop brings on results in them actually physically changing corporeal form and becoming what they idolized in their mind. Looks like we're down to just 3, so give me just a minute. I'm going to wrap up. Make my exit. Okay, and now let me get swapped over, and I will be right back with Star Citizen. Like I said, I will have to end stream briefly just to split the VOD up, but that will only take me a minute, and then I'll be right back, so don't go anywhere.